Again, if there's one thing I have heard on the doors in this campaign is that people cannot afford the cost of living. I would say this, followed closely by crime, is the number one issue in this election, not just in my riding, but across the country. Now, if you thought that the last 10 years of Liberal government was bad with regard to cost of living because of Justin Trudeau's inflationary deficit budgets, oh man, if Mark Carney has promised something even worse. So, as I walk you through this, I want you to ask yourself a question. Are you better off after 10 years of Liberal government? Is life more affordable for you? Now I want you to look at what Mark Carney is proposing. Mark Carney is proposing something that makes Justin Trudeau look like a wise steward of taxpayer funds. It's just incredible what Mark Carney is proposing. This is a chart from Bloomberg News. Mark Carney actually was on this board of directors at one point in time. Now, look at this. Look at this chart. This chart shows three bars over the, or sorry, 3 bars over the next 4 years. The first is what the Trudeau government said that the deficit would be. Okay. The next bar is what the parliamentary budget officer said the deficit would be based on the Trudeau government spending. The yellow bar is what Mark Carney said he would spend if he stayed on as prime minister. You guys, Mark Carney is getting ready to throw fuel on the inflationary deficit budget file. Now, okay, now that you've had a look at that chart, again, I want you to think about what that means for you. Let's think about how much the cost of living increased with Justin Trudeau's inflationary deficit budgets, right? Because he increased the debt through deficit budgets so much, we've had to pay more in interest payments. In fact, now the interest payments on the federal debt are more every year than what the federal government spends on the entire Canadian healthcare system. And because those inflationary budgets put so much pressure on the Canadian system, essentially there had to be money printed. And that is what, for the most part, led to inflation in Canada, that cost of living increase. Now imagine that cost of living increase that you're already living with because of the Liberal government, what that would look like under Mark Carney's proposal that I just showed you. He's actually proposing this, like, I'm sorry, I can't wrap my brain around the fact that he wants to increase spending that much. We need to be getting spending under control in this country so that we can reduce the cost of living. And that's exactly what Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre proposed this week. He had a very smart fiscal plan that proposed to get Canada's finances under control through things like cutting consultants, expensive consultants that the government has given billions and billions of dollars to, sometimes through fraudulent things. Like, remember the Arrive scam app, that there was concerns about fraud in that? The We Charity scandal, that was a whole scandal too of spending, right? So Pierre Poilievre has said that he would get Canada's finances under control through common sense measures. The other thing that Pierre Poilievre is promising is, rather than just spending on government contractors and God knows what, Mark Carney didn't even outline everything that they were going to spend that money on, which is kind of sus to me. We'd also be cutting income taxes by 15%. So that question that I asked you earlier, are you better off after 10 years of the Liberal government? Can you afford more things than you could 10 years ago? If the answer to that is no, you can't vote for Mark Carney. Mark Carney is proposing to make things worse than what Justin Trudeau was doing. And if the answer to your question is, I can afford things, I'm fine, I've got a paid off house, my kids are out of the house, just think about what would happen to the Canadian government writ large. Think about what could happen if Mark Carney puts these deficits in place. Everybody's financial situation in Canada is precarious, right? Because the more that we spend, The more that we put onto Canada's federal debt, that means the more that we have to pay in interest payments. And we know that Mark Carney will have to do something to deal with that, right? I've seen articles in major newspapers speculating that the Liberals might have to do something like tax primary residence, capital gains on primary residences, right? They said that they would never touch these things, and yet they still increased capital gains on other stuff later last year. So just know that what Mark Carney is proposing is essentially to juice Canada's fiscal woes and problems. There's no fiscal responsibility in his platform, right? It's actually worse than what Justin Trudeau is proposing. And this makes sense. This makes sense because Mark Carney was Justin Trudeau's economic advisor for years. For years, right? Maybe that's why Chrystia Freeland ran against him. You know, I guys, this election, there's so much at stake in this election. And I've literally knocked, our team thousands of doors in the last few weeks. And nobody in my community can afford what Mark Carney is proposing. And so, if you're watching this, it doesn't matter where you're watching this in the country. We need to unite as a country. And for the sake of our confederation, reject what the Liberals and Mark Carney are proposing, which is to bankrupt our country, to make things worse, to make things less affordable, right? They don't have your best interest at heart. Mark Carney sat on the boards of some of the world's richest corporations. He's been caught on audio talking about, how his primary concern was shareholder returns, right? We need a leader who is concerned about your prosperity and your ability to make ends meet. And that's not Mark Carney. That's conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. So, folks, we're entering the last few days of this campaign. We know that the mainstream media is not helping to get this message out. So I ask you to share this video. It's an easy thing that you can do to help get the word out. Show people that chart at the front of this video. We cannot afford what the Liberals and Mark Carney are proposing, which is to bankrupt this country and to take away that promise of Canada even more. And that promise should be that if you work hard, you can afford an affordable house in a safe neighborhood and that you can prosper and grow throughout your life. That's the promise that we need to restore. And that's what conservatives are proposing with our smart, common sense, fully costed plan, which you can read on conservative.ca. Share this video. Working hard for you. Have a great day.